online and throughout Parliament buildings. So welcome to those of you watching online. Could you please ensure that your phones are muted and that no recording or photography of the meeting is allowed? Okay, so if members are content, we'll go through the agenda then. So apologies from Carol Killen, who is apparently in front of the COVID inquiry today, so we wish her well with that. And I think we're still waiting for Podrick to come online, and also Claire will be joining shortly. So can I ask if anyone has any declarations of interest to declare?
Yes, Chair, I have an interest. One of the people presenting to us this afternoon, Cohen Taylor, is an employee of mine. However, he's obviously not working for me today. He's here in his capacity as Chair of the Northern Ireland Youth Forum.
Okay, thank you, Connie. Any others? No. Okay. So in terms of chairperson's business, I don't have any today. So members, in terms of the draft minutes, you'll find these on pages 7 to 13 of your meeting pack, and I'm just wondering if everybody's content that they're a true reflection of the proceedings of the meetings. Yep. Okay, so I'll go ahead and get those signed. Any matters arising? No? Okay, members, so we'll move on then. Sorry, go ahead. Yes, please.
Roderick's just texted me that he hasn't got the link.
Okay, we'll get that sorted, but thank you, Emma. Okay, so members, we're going to move on with our first oral evidence session, and just would like to welcome to the meeting Chris Gardner, who's the Director of Good Relations and Inclusion Unit at the Executive Office, Angharad, we're Good Relations and Inclusion Division, Executive Office, and Charlene Sharkey, Good Relations and Inclusion Division, Executive Office as well. Okay, so we're just wondering why we haven't received any papers in advance of the meeting.
I can only accept my apologies if possible. There was delays in the departmental clearing process, unforeseen. The expectation is that the paper is done. It will be with you shortly, likely for the end of the committee or sometime after.
With the end of the committee, okay.
Possibly it might be after the end of the committee.
Okay, but you've stuff to speak to now then?
Absolutely, yes.
Okay, well if you'd like to go ahead and brief members, that'd be great, thank you.
Thank you, Chair, for the invitation to appear here today to update the committee with an overview of our work in relation to peace and reconciliation. If members are content, I will provide an update focused on the delivery of the Together Building United Community Strategy, otherwise commonly known as the TBUC strategy. I'll also look at wider aspects of good relations delivery and the ongoing review of the TBUC strategy. The Good Relations and TBUC division leads on the coordination and oversight of TBUC, as well as being the responsible department for 2 of the 7 headline actions, TBUC camps and the Urban Villages Initiative. Across the 7 headline actions, considerable progress has been made, with a number of targets fully achieved, while progress continues to be made towards other targets in often complex areas of work. Since the TBUC camps programme began in 2015, over 870 camps have been delivered to over 30,000 young people, with a total investment from TEO of over £10.5 million. 5 urban village areas have been established and continue to develop. The target of building 10 shared neighbourhoods has been met, with the programme acting as a catalyst for DFC's Housing for All programme. There are now a total of 76 shared neighbourhoods, either complete or in development, providing 2,500 homes. Approximately 1/3 of interface barriers have been removed, another third have been reduced in stature, and work continues across the remaining sites, including a focus on the communities most impacted by them. Over half of the 21 interface barriers in the housing executive ownership have been removed as a result of the funding provided through TBUC. The Peace for Youth programme was successfully delivered to over 6,000 young people through the United Youth Headline Action. It is expected that the target set in TBUC of 10,000 participants will be met as the programme continues under Peace Plus. More than 27,000 participants took part in the Uniting Communities Through Sport programme and Young Leader Training. And the Limavady Shared Education Campus is operational and was officially opened by the First and Deputy First Minister in February 2024. This represented the first shared facility of its kind. Wider good relations programmes, such as the Central Good Relations Fund, the District Council Good Relations programmes, and programmes delivered by the Community Relations Council, are also aligned with the strategic objectives of the TBUC strategy. Since 2016, more than £25 million has been invested in community-based projects delivering activities to improve good relations through the Central Good Relations Fund. In addition to this, £30 million has been invested by the Executive Office and District Council since 2013 in the District Council Good Relations programme. As you'll be aware, 2023-24 brought significant budgetary challenges with difficult decisions required by departmental officials in order to make the savings needed across the Executive Office. Decision making was informed by an EKIA, and reductions of around 50% were applied to the Central Good Relations Fund and the District Council Good Relations Programme. The response to the EKIA acknowledged that these reductions would have a significant impact on a number of Section 75 groups. Notwithstanding the challenges last year, this body of work represents substantial positive progress towards a future that we all want to see. But it is recognised that in the 11 years since the strategy was published, the fabric of society has changed and the issues that communities face have also changed. It was against this backdrop that ministers requested that officials conduct a review of the TBUC strategy with a view to developing a refreshed approach to good relations. Officials are currently developing a final draft of the review for ministers' consideration and agreement on next steps. There is broad consensus that TBUC has set a good foundation for good relations moving forward, with a significant amount of delivery continuing to be achieved. The headline action model has driven progress across key thematic areas and provided an indication of what works well. However, it is clear that there's more work to be done, and there remains segregation along typical community backgrounds in many parts of society. This segregation comes at a considerable cost and exacerbates long-term issues from an economic, socio-economic and public finance perspective. More broadly, the review has established a link between good relations, wider socio-economic factors and well-being. In mapping our delivery, it is clear that good relations projects are often delivered in areas of multiple deprivation. Therefore, a more collaborative approach is likely to facilitate more impactful delivery, while also making it easier to measure total investment in specific areas and measure the return on that investment. It is also evident that how people identify is changing and the issues that matter to them continue to evolve. There is a need to ensure that any refreshed approach to good relations continues to engage people through the issues which matter to them. Given the success of TBUC and the desire to build on its progress to date, it is proposed that a refreshed strategic approach is developed through a stakeholder engagement process with the aim of producing an inclusive, flexible framework which encourages greater collaboration with other relevant government strategies. One of the most important aspects of TBUC has been the scale of delivery achieved on an ongoing basis, and it's recognised that any refreshed strategic approach should be action-orientated and have a visible, engaged presence in local communities. While the future strategic direction is considered, current programme delivery will continue with a focus on emphasising delivery on the ground. 2023-24 saw this continued progress across headline actions, including the aforementioned Limavady shared education campus opening and the headline actions generally been able to deliver in full. Calls for applications to the 2024-25 Central Good Relations Fund and the TBUC Camps programme have closed and assessments completed. District Council action plans have been submitted, assessed and agreed with officials. With that, I'm happy to take questions.
Okay, thank you. Ladies, have you anything to add at this point? No. Okay, well, thank you very much. There's quite a lot to get through, and I suppose that's why we're so frustrated that we didn't have the papers, because we could have then gone away and looked at some of the stuff and have more substantive, but I appreciate it wasn't entirely your fault that you weren't able to get them signed off. So I've just a few questions to start off with, so thank you for your presentation. So you talked there around the process for going out in terms of the stakeholder engagement. Could you give us a wee bit more information around that? Because I'm conscious that if there's a smaller budget going forward, that you are going to have to be more targeted in terms of your approach. I'm just wondering how you're going to be able to engage as many people as possible, but get to a point where you're actually quite targeted.
Be targeted in terms of our engagement or delivery?
No, but I mean in terms of engaging people and then being able to come up with the follow-up to TBUC then that is actually a wee bit more targeted where it's most needed.
Sure. So we've had, as part of the review, we've had significant engagement with stakeholders already, and that's been comprehensive across other government departments, local government, key stakeholders in the sector, many here sitting here today, academics in the space and other interested parties. The idea moving forward would be there would be a number of options presented to ministers on how we best engage with the appropriate stakeholders. We have identified, I think, a significant number that we would like to engage with on an ongoing basis, and certainly within any new proposed framework, I would like that to include some type of ongoing engagement with stakeholders throughout programme delivery, so not just in the design phase, but build that into the framework on an ongoing basis.
Okay, Okay. You mentioned there around the piece walls, a third removed, a third reduced, and a third still got a piece of work. Could you talk a wee bit further into that space, please?
Yeah, so interfaces, I think everybody will recognise as one of the most challenging areas, and it's a good example as part of the TBUC review and the evidence we've gathered as part of that. It's clear that the closer communities live to an interface, generally the more socio-economically deprived they are. So it would appear that stakeholders would see a broader approach to interface removal being necessary moving forward, and reducing the walls should be potentially one part of a wider programme to socially regenerate areas. And if we can alleviate some of the socio-economic issues, then that perhaps presents more of an opportunity to bring the walls down in due course.
Okay, I suppose some of us are very frustrated that 26 years on from the Good Friday Agreement, they're there, and for many people that is their norm. Is there any possibility that going forward there may be an overlap between where urban villages are or where the target programmes are that would be based around where these peace walls are? Because you say there's that sort of socio-economic issue as well as the infrastructural, physical challenge.
I think there's a lot of positive learning points to take from the Urban Village programme and other sort of geographically focused programmes as well. I'd say it's too early to say if there will be an urban village model adopted in an interface area, but it would certainly be fair to say that's part of the options on the table would be to adopt an approach which has been successful in regenerating areas and apply it to interface areas.
Okay, and lastly for me for now, you talked about the Housing for All, the Shared Neighbourhood programme, and there's a few of those in South Belfast where I represent, and they're very, very successful, but I know one recently there actually got turned down, got refused on the Lisburn Road. So is there, to what degree are you feeding through the positive sort of evaluation from the programme into the likes of the Housing Executive and Department for Communities to see that programme could be extended, because it is a very good model for actually creating shared neighbourhoods?
Yeah, it is, and just recently the Housing Executive have actually taken over the full running of the programme, so it's fully embedded now in their day-to-day delivery and their housing supply strategy, which is a fantastic step in mainstreaming the work into wider delivery. This year as well, they've also came on board with our outcomes approach, so we are able to measure the impact on people who live in shared neighbourhoods, and it's not just the shared neighbourhoods, it's the range of good relations activities in the 5 mile radius around them that have been really effective. So we're able to gauge the impact of that project delivery on those people who live in the community, and the idea is that we try and further that impact measurement moving forward under a new framework and into something even more comprehensive than it is at the minute.
Okay, thank you. I've other ones, but I want to let others in. So I'll go to the Deputy Chair, Connie, please. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you. I think I'd just like to reiterate what Paula has said, that it does make the work of this committee very difficult when papers aren't provided in advance, and very conscious that blockage is not from yourselves sitting here in front of us, which is equally frustrating. So I appreciate you're hoping it will come before the end of the meeting, but we're here now. So thank you for coming today, and hopefully we can maybe tease out some of the issues we'd like to discuss and questions. So the first thing I'd like to raise really is you'd mentioned quite a stark figure, about a 50% cut in good relations funding, and that's primarily delivered through local councils. Could you maybe just talk about the kind of projects that we're seeing being cut because of that, and what's coming out in the EQIAs that you mentioned from that?
Yeah, so the 50% reductions were applied to the Central Good Relations Fund, which is the fund that we deliver through the Executive Office, and then 50% to the District Council programme. In terms of the effect on the District Council programme, it would have differed by council area. So we focused on trying to make sure that the infrastructure around good relations delivery was intact, so that whenever, in the hopeful event that we are able to reverse some of the cuts in due course, that the infrastructure is still there to maintain delivery. So that has meant in council areas we largely maintained a network of good relations officers who were able to continue their good work in their local communities. Some council areas would have had to reduce delivery of a certain element of the programmes on the ground, but thankfully a number of councils also contributed more of their own funding to mitigate some of the impact of the reductions. So it's hard to say exactly what was reduced, broadly speaking, but the efforts were made to mitigate the impact where possible, both by ourselves and by local councils.
Thanks. through the chair, just to follow up to that, we've had the budget settlement of last week. Are you working on the basis that much of that will be reinstated, and that going forward we can see those projects back up? Because as you mentioned, some councils are putting some of their money towards it. That will vary from area to area, with the different councils' finances. And ideally, I think everybody would like to see some of these projects fully funded by the Executive Office.
Yeah, I can speak to the process, I think, at the minute. So my finance colleague, Ronan Murda, has a submission with ministers which sets out options on how the budget could be, on how TU's budget could be allocated, and that includes an allocation to good relations. Once that submission is approved, there will then be a submission from our perspective, which will set out how the good relations allocation should be distributed across the TU Good Relations programmes, but then also the TBUC headline actions delivered by ourselves, but also by the other departments as well.
Okay. Thank you. Okay, Sinead, please.
Okay, thank you, Chair. On the 8th of April, the Assembly voted for the TEO to bring forward a strategic framework for a shared future, delivering public sector reform and to tackle the cost of division while building good relations work that has already undertaken. How has this motion affected your work?
It's certainly been taken into consideration as part of the TBUC review and the outworkings of that. From my perspective, it felt like what we have in mind is in many ways in line. It is a new strategic framework to address, the ongoing good relations issues. So we will take it into account as part of the stakeholder engagement process and make sure that it's reflected in any wider proposals moving forward.
Okay, it's just that when the Assembly debates something and passes it, we would expect more than just, taking it into account. It's the elected reps have spoken and the motion has passed. So just from our perspective, sometimes it feels like a debating society rather than actually, we want this work to move forward in the way that the Assembly has discussed it.
Okay, so in terms of the TBUC review and the outcomes of that, we're in the process of developing a submission to ministers that will have recommendations on the way forward, and that submission will absolutely take account of the fact that there was a motion passed in that regard.
And then also, how has the profile of spending to tackle divisions changed in recent years in order to take and reflect our growing diverse communities? Because it's no longer orange and green. We have got a very colourful communities, very diverse. And how do we tackle building that diverse community through funding and the funding to those organisations that are doing that in a variety of ways?
Yeah, I'll make 2 points on this. The first one is internally within TU. Across the same director of colleagues working on racial equality and working on refugee integration. So we are well connected with those colleagues and the strategies that they are working on at that strategic level. On the ground, we're working with stakeholders to make sure that TBUC in its current form is seen as an inclusive strategy for all. There can be a perception that it is a strategy aimed at the predominant community backgrounds here, which is not necessarily the case at all, but there's that perception. And I think with the current structures around applying for funding, sometimes newcomers and minority ethnics can be disadvantaged simply because of the amount of paperwork and experience that's often required to apply for funding. So moving forward, I'd like to make that, number one, make sure that the strategy is explicitly very inclusive to everybody that now comprises our communities here, and two, that access and funding is more streamlined.
And Section 75 should, reflect that if you're coming over. Can I ask another
go ahead.
question? When can we expect the TBUC consultation? When do we expect that report?
The TBUC review being published. Once we have got it cleared by First and Deputy First Minister. So I guess sorry, that's not a very good answer. We'll be providing a submission with a range of options on the way forward, and once that has been approved, the next steps will be announced in terms of the process. it's difficult to
I
put.
have 100 questions to ask, but
Yeah, I'll move on and then I'll come back to
Right,
a few to
okay.
come back to as well. Harry, go ahead, please.
Okay, thank you very much, Chair. Thank you, Chris, Acherrod and Charlene. Good to see you. Just thinking in terms of TBOC and looking back, you mentioned the number of villages, homes or whatever that you have already done. I'm just wondering, and looking forward, how many villages, homes are you considering looking at and what areas?
I'd say that our forward planning hasn't reached that level of detail yet. The expectation is that there will be a broader framework will be put in place before that level of detail is looked at and considered. In terms of the housing, I can say that the housing executive have a target at the minute of having 10% of their annual housing stock delivered on a shared basis. And that's been built into their plans moving forward, so there is a bit of certainty there. I know colleagues in the Urban Village division are looking at future plans for that programme, and they would be best placed to update on those areas.
Okay. And just a wee
Go ahead,
follow-up,
yeah, go
Chair,
ahead.
thank you. And just wondering, how long would the contact with the TBOC be kept up with previous work? Do you have a sort of time where you would cut off and say, right, you're on your own, or would you keep up?
In terms of past participants
Yeah,
in the programmes, I think we recognise that good relations is often a journey, and we don't necessarily expect a participant to have a life-changing impact that we see from just attending one project. So we're very keen to ensure that people have the opportunity to engage repeatedly in good relations work, but that can't come at the expense at the same time of targeting individuals who are most in need of good relations work.
Yep.
Yeah, so it's
Just
trying
every
to strike
case
that
is
balance.
different. Okay, thank you very much. Thank you, Chair.
Brian, please.
Okay, thank you, Chair. Thank you for the information so far. Well, as a representative for North Belfast, I have a lot of engagement in interface issues and good relations work over many years, and as an elected rep. So I would recognise, whilst they're not the same thing, there is a strong correlation between good relations and community development, capacity building, also economic development, and I think that's been recognised in initiatives such as Urban Villages and previously Social Investment Fund. And so it's necessary to work with other government departments for people to see areas which are often low-income areas and suffering multiple disadvantage. How are you engaging with other departments to promote good relations, recognising that connection, as I say, with community and economic development?
So since TBOC has published and the governance structure around that were put in place, that has included representation across departments for the past number of years, and then more recently, I think that there's been an understanding and an acknowledgement at official level that there's a lot of overlap in our policy areas, and from our perspective, we would see segregation or cost of division being an issue that impacts on other policy areas. So on that basis, we've used the governance structures around TBOC to have that conversation with other departments, and how we can move from having good relations delivered at a programme level by other departments to almost trying to lift it up a level and have it built in ultimately into their decision making, across their portfolio of work, to try and make those links between our policy area and the other policy areas.
And one further question. Specifically, I want to highlight, I mentioned about capacity building, the role of community and voluntary sector and just residents who will stand up for their areas. It's very important that there is that investment in capacity building and support for people who are very influential on the ground. It is those interface communities. If a small number of people put their mind to it causing trouble, and we had an upsurge earlier this year, in parts of North and West Belfast, and thankfully that was addressed, the concerted action. But just to highlight the importance of that support for in areas where you have to be quite brave and have endurance and resilience, to step forward as a local person that you're wanting to represent the interests of your community and promote good relations. So it's important that support is provided, and there's a number of areas where people are trying to get community facilities, and are struggling, to get the funding, and they keep being hit with, capacity issues, or and when it comes to due diligence. So it's important that, as I say, that continuing support for those groups is provided.
Yeah, fully agree. A couple of points to make there. We have a capacity building report, which maybe Charlene can summarise quickly, and we're also conducting a survey of the workforce in good relations to understand the breakdown of the workforce in terms of how many people are working where and what age profile they are, to understand how this might develop moving forward and how we might need to support this better moving forward potentially. But maybe let you speak to capacity.
Thanks, Chris. Yeah, we've been doing a bit of work the past couple of years on just looking at the capacity building sort of thing, and speaking to each of the good relations officers in the councils, just because every area is completely different. Looking at, hate crime stats across each area. There's areas maybe that there are no stats to show. People may be reluctant to report, but the good relations officers are great, at highlighting those areas. Just trying to see what are the certain areas, or what are the issues groups are up against when it comes to capacity building. Like you say, they maybe don't have backing up their community, or they don't have the facilities, or maybe they need more training around delivering good relations, things like that. But it's very much a work in progress, and we've been looking at other programmes that TEO has funded to see what's going on, just so that there's no duplication in anything that we recommend.
Okay, thank you. Claire, please.
Thank you, Chair. I kind of want to pick up on a point that the Chair had made around peace walls, and it kind of leads on to kind of other questions in relation to how good relations interacts with other departments and the work that they're doing. In a former life as Minister of Justice, I met with communities in North Belfast in relation to trying to bring down one of the peace walls. And after a 10-minute conversation on the physical structure itself, it became very apparent to me that it wasn't about that. It was about socio-economic issues within those communities. And the peace wall in itself was almost, if we bring this down, what are we getting? And ultimately it was what government should be providing for them anyway. So I suppose that kind of leads me on to my conversation around how do we screen the programme for government to recognise that the true way of really building good relations is about building communities up through social economic perspectives, but also other aspects of the programme for government. And is there an interest or even a recognition from the Executive Office that it needs to be integrated in that way? Because sometimes it feels like it sits very much within the Executive Office, but doesn't necessarily permeate through all the other departments, where I believe that's genuinely the fix. That if we truly want to have good relations, we actually need to build communities up, and we do that through public services. So it's just really to give your comments in relation to that.
Yes, there is recognition of that,
Okay.
certainly from our perspective. I'll sort of not talk about PFG in detail, just that's my colleague Michael's area, but we do see the need to have good relations built in across departmental decision making. I think as the goal in the long term is to have it mainstreamed. That said, I think at the minute it still needs that drive from the Executive Office. So I think it's too early to fully mainstream, and my worry would be that it becomes some sort of tick box exercise that is not effective. So I think TBUC has set a fantastic foundation. It's been heavy on deliverables, and how can we build on that? So can we move to the next step where we still have the drive from the centre, but that we try to get it built into the work streams of other departments more holistically, and then with the long-term aim of having it fully mainstreamed.
Okay. Do you get a sense that other departments recognise that and are willing to almost embrace that area of work, that screening nearly that needs to happen?
Based on the conversations we've been having, yes. Between officials, we seem to recognise that we're all dealing with very similar issues. They might look slightly different, but at the heart of it, they all tend to be quite similar. And we're all delivering in our own individual programmes and strategies. And I think there is a recognition there that a more collaborative approach is going to be more impactful.
Another?
You go ahead.
I met with some of the groups that we're going to hear from later in relation to peace and reconciliation, and post GFA 25, you know, there was an awful lot of conversations about what happens next in terms of that. I personally believe that we haven't fully reconciled, and you know, the way we do that is by embracing one another and having those conversations. Is there any work happening at the minute to kind of continue that piece so that it doesn't sort of get left to the wayside, or it doesn't, you know, sort of fall victim to other priorities within the department?
Yeah, the review's still very much front and centre of our work. The engagement aspect of it has largely finished, but we continue to engage with stakeholders internally within the department and externally across other departments and across external stakeholders to ensure that we have that continued focus, because I think we do recognise that it's been 25, 26 years since Belfast Good Friday Agreement, and now I guess we need to shift our focus to what happens in the next 25 years, and always try and set out a vision for that 25 years.
Okay. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Emma, please.
Thank you, Chair, and thanks for your presentation. I suppose my question would sort of touch on the point that Sinead had made earlier around the fact that as a society we're changing, and obviously Ireland at one time was very much a conservative, you could say in a lot of ways, down through the years, a backwards country, and like thinking not just of people who are coming here as new communities, but also our LGBTQI population, who regrettably for years and years an awful lot of those people felt the need that they had to hide or leave, and that's no longer the case, but we are seeing hate crime in that motivation rising. So I wonder if you could speak to how that, in terms of inclusion, how that has been factored in. And if I could, just one other question around, I suppose, the work that you're doing and the strategies and all of this, like others from inner city areas have referred to the challenges that are facing the division that is still there. But I was at an event on Friday past about rights in the New Ireland, and Eileen Weir, who you probably know from the Shankill Women's Centre, had spoke really eloquently about the fact that on the ground this work is being done. Community activists are doing this work organically. And I know in the part of the world that I'm from, and I am from a rural area in South Derry, and I grew up in a farming family, and like people of all backgrounds, it just was never considered. When people, like in our house at home, neighbours called in, and it did not matter what side of the religious divide that you were from, and it was never a consideration. And I think that some of the times we're drafting these strategies and doing this work, and the people are far ahead of us. But the influence of media and the narrative that is put out there ramps up tension and division, particularly at specific times of year, that is completely unnecessary. And I wonder if you've got a view on how unhelpful that is to your work and what you're doing.
Yeah, I think compared to when T-Buck was published, yes, social media was around, but it wasn't as prevalent as it is. So as part of the review, we actually engaged with Ofcom just to try and understand from our perspective the social media picture a bit better and what we can do moving forward, because I think it does drive a lot of behavioural patterns on the ground, and young people in particular are consuming that content, and because of the way social media is set up, once they consume that content once or twice, that's all they see potentially whenever they go onto social media. So there's definitely something there that we need to be aware of and potentially look at what we can do moving forward to...
Even, sorry to cut across you, but even mainstream media. Like we have, like I'm sure everybody can think of the one particular example that we have that's just driving that all the time, that it's not reality on the ground. Like, you know, it's putting out this soap opera narrative of what life is actually like here.
It's difficult to challenge that mainstream narrative. You know, we do have various platforms where we highlight the massive amounts of good work ongoing. What I think might be helpful moving forward is actually to have a proactive comms approach to what we do. So it's happening, as you say, it's happening organically, but can we put more structure around that to try and capture the positive impact and put a positive message around it and start to broadcast that, you know, to a greater audience, all being well.
Good.
Your first question then around the inclusion. So from a statutory perspective, we deliver through Section 75(2) only. But in our sort of consultation with the Equality Commission, we've discussed how we can cater to other Section 75 groups, and it would appear like my assessment would be that we can do, as long as we do it through the lens of Section 75 too, first of all, but there's no reason we can't do that, whilst also catering to the wider Section 75 two groups, or sorry, the wider Section 75 categories. And that's something that we'll be looking at, as we develop a new framework moving forward. In terms of the race hate issues, I think the data shows for the first time they're now higher than sectarian race hate incidents, are now higher than sectarianism. So we're working closely with colleagues internally as they develop their racial equality strategy and the refugee integration strategy, to try and make sure that we're linked up in that regard. And then more practically, if there's sort of emerging issues on the ground, we tend to be part of the response group put together for those, to make sure that anything that we can do from a good relations perspective in terms of delivery that might help with those issues, that we can advise on that and try and point people in the right direction.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Podrick online, you there? Go ahead, Podrick. Oh, we can't hear you. Try again.
Yeah, it was muted from your end. Thanks.
Thank you.
So yeah, just to follow up on a lot of the questions that have already been asked as well. Thank you for your presentation. Firstly, I'm just keen to hear around, like within my own area in the Moor, is obviously an urban village area. We've seen the benefits of that. Keen to kind of understand, what are your success criteria? What are your developmental criteria for that? How do you actually assess whether that's working? And how often is that evaluated? I'm really keen to hear around that evaluation process, because as Emma's mentioned, things have changed in a I suppose a positive way, in that we have a lot more new communities here. We're talking about LGBTQI issues. But the flip side of that is that we're also seeing a lot more targeted incidents of racism, which we saw in my city last week, absolutely vile racist abuse. And how do we actually ensure that these strategies are updated to reflect that changing demographic, to reflect the fact that, I suppose, when we're challenging sectarianism, really we're challenging an ingrained hatred and an intolerance. And for me, that's challenging sectarianism, but it can't be done through that lens and simultaneously not challenge racism, homophobia, sexism, all those other issues as well. So how can your strategy overlap? I appreciate you've answered that to a certain extent as well, but it's how that process is evaluated.
Thanks, Berg. Yeah, so at a project level, we capture baseline positions across three key metrics of knowledge, attitude, and behaviour towards people from different backgrounds. And we then, at the end of a project, capture a project end position. So that allows us to establish, first of all, the baseline, and then measure the impact that the programme has had on participants across those three metrics. And generally, our programmes are very successful at doing that. I think then there's wider benefits to our programmes which perhaps aren't always captured, and that could be across other socioeconomic domains such as educational outcomes, or it could be qualifications and training. So that's definitely an area of focus moving forward. And then for each of the different programmes under the headline actions, they're subject to evaluations independently, between every 1 to 3 years, as are our programmes internally. And then those evaluations are used to shape programme delivery moving forward by each of the departments. More close to home then, in terms of our TEO programmes within the Central Good Relations Fund, the District Council programme, and the TBOC Camps programme. We try to use, if we're aware of emerging issues or issues that have been quite severe over the past number of months, for example, we will, whenever we open for application, we'll try and use welcoming statements that identify those areas and welcome projects that would specifically address those themes.
Yeah, that's really useful, and it's encouraging to hear, because I think it's that evolving process is what I'm touching on, and obviously that's something which you've mentioned that you've built in as well, so it's reassuring to hear that. I'm wondering about the quantifiable data as well, because quite often we're seeing changes over time in this, and we're seeing qualifiable stuff, which is useful. In terms of your quantifiable data, how do you measure that? What metrics do you use to measure that? I think it would be really useful if, I appreciate you won't have this maybe to hand, but if that could be sent on to committee just for our understanding as well, because to me that's really critical in us being able to measure that, and be part of that process over time. It's reassuring to hear all that you've put in place, but I think it just allows us a better lens on how this process works.
Yeah. So a couple of points there. The metrics on knowledge, attitude, and behaviour, they are all on a scale of 0 to 10, so we can quantify those changes. Number one, and number two is I think what you're getting at is that sort of longitudinal impacts of what happens over a number of years. And as times went on, we've now got data for certain programs over a number of years that allows us to compare the impact of that. And I think moving forward, we'd love to be in a position where we can track longitudinal impact, even in a more comprehensive fashion than that. Longitudinal analysis can be difficult just because of the nature of it over a long period of time, but that obviously doesn't mean that we shouldn't do it. So I think moving forward, potentially, developing a new framework gives us that opportunity to relook at how we capture the impact of it and make it more holistic, and that's certainly, one of the items that's high up on our agenda.
Okay, no, that's really reassuring to hear that. Thank you.
I think Sinead has a follow-up.
Just a follow-up of what Padraig was asking about. I suppose, if you look at the areas, the TBUC areas, they're quite often areas of high deprivation. And I totally agree with what Padraig's saying, in terms of the data collection and the analysis of it. So if it's changing lives, and that's what we want to do, we're changing communities, building communities, then it has to be about investing in those communities. So it's working cross departments, it's working with Invest NI, investing in those areas that feel the furthest away from being integrated. So it is about education. It's about educational outcomes. It's also about health outcomes. It's about life expectancy. It's, are things really changing? And really, if they have better knowledge, better attitudes, better behaviour, and they're dying younger, and they have no disposable income, and they haven't got a good job, well, what do we expect? So I really, we've been at this, we've been hammering TBUC for a long, long time now, and we really haven't changed communities. We haven't. It hasn't been tackled. And we haven't built peace, and we haven't built reconciliation in a lot of these areas. And we've seen it again at the weekend in Bushmills. Paramilitary, it's grasping communities, and it's not letting go. And it's growing more intense in those communities. So we're really not there. It is a journey. Building peace and reconciliation is a journey, but it also is building wealth and communities and investment. And I think that that's what we're getting to here when we're talking about data. It's that data. People die earlier in Derry than anywhere else. Probably North Belfast competes with us. But, and it's very stark, and investment doesn't follow that. Health outcomes doesn't follow that either. So it's really important that we actually have the real data to see if we are changing. And you said longitudinal data. We've got that data. We have got the data around health and wealth, but we're not investing in those places. Sorry.
That's okay. Do you want to respond, or?
Yeah, I mean, we from our engagement in the TBUC review, that has come across loud and clear. On the one hand, sometimes it's hard to measure impact of what we do in a way because there's no parallel universe that shows what happened if we didn't engage the thousands upon thousands of young people. So the issues you describe could be worse per se, but it's very hard to obviously articulate that.
The gaps are getting bigger, but Chris,
yes,
the gaps are getting
and
bigger.
I think we can, on the one hand, we can point to a society here that has the highest employment rate, or one of the highest employment rates it has. We're attracting more foreign investment. We have some of the best educational outcomes in the world, but then on the flip side, we have pockets of communities that have, massive rates of illiteracy. They have a lot of labour market inactivity and things. So there's pockets of communities that are left behind that are more challenging to engage with for a number of reasons. And having a more targeted approach moving forward is arguably going to increase our impact. Yes.
Can I just follow up on that a bit in terms of moving forward? So we had the FICT report, £800,000 FICT report. To what degree was that sort of qualitative work that was carried out during that process, to what degree is that feeding into TBUC in terms of the difficult issues to address and tackle? And then going forward again, to what degree will your work then fold into the Office of Identity and Cultural Expression? To what degree will they take some of your work on?
In terms of FICT, we've been very conscious of the FICT report and the recommendations of it as part of our TBUC review, and how those more complex issues can be, potentially reflected in some way in a new strategic framework moving forward. It's difficult, I guess, at this point before we get to that phase to provide much more detail on what that might look like. I know there's a briefing scheduled specifically on FICT in a few weeks' time, and I'm happy to provide more detail at that point if we can.
But sorry, just before you go on, and I think this way the committee's becoming quite frustrated with TEO, because it just seems that there's just so many silos just even within your department. Somebody's dealing with FICT here and somebody's dealing with these types of victims here and stuff, and I just think that we just don't feel that the work is really just coalescing really.
Yeah, and just for clarity, FICT is my
FICT
is within I'll be back. But yeah, so it is, and that is an advantage in that we've been able to. We had a knowledge before my time in TU, but we have that internal knowledge of FICT and the process around it, that we have been able to build it into the TBUC review and consider what it means, and how it interplays with all the other factors in terms of building good relations.
Yeah, but I think the point we're getting at today is that because your budget is shrinking, and we're a generation on, we nearly need to be honing in on those really difficult issues that are still left, sort of a toxicity still within our society, and I think that's really what I'm trying to get to is, to what degree are you going to focus in on the really difficult issues, the most hard to reach areas, etc.
Yeah, I think it has to form a key part of any sort of new strategic framework. We're going to have a stakeholder engagement process, so I don't want to sort of prejudice the outcomes of what they may say, but my assessment would be that having that sharper edge to delivery is important moving forward. We have colleagues working on the Communities in Transition programme, and we have colleagues in DOJ working on the Tackling Paramilitarism programme. It would seem to make sense that they are connected up in some way, and if they're working, then people should almost be going on a journey from the most extreme to hopefully ending up in a good relations programme where they're sort of fully reconciled and live a less segregated lifestyle. So that would all, I agree that it makes sense.
Makes full sense, especially when you're using public money.
Yeah, yes, absolutely. Yeah.
Okay, any other questions from any follow-ups? No. Okay. Well, thank you so much, and if you could get that paper to us, that'd be great. We may invite you back then when we've had time to consider the full. But for now, thanks very much.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, members, we're going to move on then to our next oral briefing, our peace and reconciliation stakeholder groups, and I'm glad that the majority of them were in the gallery to hear that, so hopefully they'll reflect on what they heard. Okay, so on page 21 you'll find the clerk's brief. Page 23 there's a briefing paper from the Peace Summit Partnership. Page 26 there's a report from the Peace Summit Partnership, a call to action, 24th of May 2023. In your table pack there's a briefing from the Northern Ireland Youth Forum. So I'd like to welcome forward then, so we have Tim Atwood, Secretary of the John and Pat Hume Foundation and Lead of the Peace Summit Partnership, Dipna McGlade, Community Dialogue and Lead for the Peace Summit Partnership, Ciara Nahishka, hopefully I got that right, from Executive Committee Member from Northern Ireland Youth Forum, Cohen Taylor, Executive Community Member, Northern Ireland Youth Forum, and Sylvia Gordon, Head of Programme for Corrymeela. So you're all very welcome. I'm conscious that there's pretty much three separate organisations represented, so I'm happy for all of you to maybe speak for 3 or 4 minutes, and then that will allow us then to get into it. But I appreciate you sending your reports in advance, so we've had a chance to read those. So I'm going to ask either Dipna or Tim to lead.
I start,
yes,
Chair.
Please.
Thank you, members. I'm delighted to be here with my colleagues from Corrymeela and the Northern Ireland Youth Forum. And the Northern Ireland Youth Forum were recently involved with the Youth Action NI on a Youth Peace Summit that was held in Derry last week. So I'm sure they may comment on that from a youth perspective. Just to clarify, the John Hutchins Peace Foundation is the lead in a group of peace partners, including Community Dialogue Hollywell Trust in Derry, Glencree Peace and Reconciliation Centre, Integrated Education Fund, Ulster University, Encore, and Youth Action NI. So it's a strong group of people that came together last year to recognise, obviously we'd moved on 25 years from the Good Friday Agreement, but we recognised there was the unfinished business of peace and reconciliation, and obviously some of the comments from the TO will be relevant in terms of what we said. So we had that Peace Summit process last year, which was supported by the International Fund for Ireland, and again engagement was the most important thing. There was 350 engaged with young people across the north and cross-border, and there were 750 engagements with people on the ground in terms of community development and peace activists. The one thing that really came out strong, despite last year when there was no executive, was the positivity, especially from young people, but even the peace activists. Somebody mentioned Eileen Weir, she would have been involved with, who's been on the ground in the Shankill Road, as Brian would know, for many decades. You'd think they would be exhausted by their work in peacemaking and keeping the peace at interfaces, and the same with the other peacemakers across the north, the quiet peacemakers as we call them. But they were energised by the process. They wanted to engage because they recognised 25 years on there was still a huge amount of work to be done. We had relative peace, but some of the fundamentals around tackling peace and reconciliation were still to be completed. And we see from your question today that you have some of those concerns as well. So that process has continued on, and we are now in Peace Summit 24. Thankfully, we've got an exec, and our aim is to try to use the evidence based from young people and the peacemakers to try to influence the programme of government and policy making on the island of Ireland in terms of peace and reconciliation. And indeed, we've met the representatives of political parties, MLAs, and the executive office in recent periods as well. And it's all about an inclusive peace plan. At the end of the day, all the commentary you made about the need for departments to work together, collaboration is good, but you need some way of making sure that actually is real. And the only way to do that is break out of the silos, because the danger is that the executive office is left sort of being, well, they deal with reconciliation. That should not be the case. It needs to be a holistic, whole government approach to peace, and we want to try and ensure through our work that we promote that. Obviously, there's issues, as you mentioned, around interface barriers, the issue of paramilitary groups and the strength that they still have in some areas across the north. Paramilitary symbols, creating a shared, safe housing, ensuring resident safety, and growing and empowering peace builders. Because many of the peace builders that we talked about, they are retiring, and we need to ensure that there's people who are willing to take up the mantle in the future. And again, just some commentary in terms of that engagement. The inclusive peace plan must be all government departments. So we've talked, and as mentioned here, about good relations proofing. So the question is, when you ask that question of a government department, what have they done differently when you ask the question? There may be pressures on money, and that's a big issue, and obviously we believe that as a foundation stone of the Good Friday Agreement, resources for those involved in peace and reconciliation, whether it's on the ground or regionally, should be protected. But even if there is less money, the culture around collaboration means that you can still change attitudes and space. In terms of the point Claire and Brian made around economic change, we know that there is many places across the north where there are segregated the peace lines in North and West Belfast. 30 years ago next year, President Clinton spoke in the Springvale campus, the old Mackey site. And if it wasn't for Belfast City Council, the only investment in that part of North and West Belfast was Belfast City Council in terms of the innovation factory. There's still 12 acres. When was the last time Invest and I were said, as part of good relations proofing through the TO, said, well, what are we going to do to animate that? To create jobs, create hope for the future. And in each of your areas, you'll be able to identify that through social and economic development, you can create hope, and then you build a basis for peace and reconciliation, rather than sometimes where these spaces can be used for recreational violence. So unless we have a wholesale, inclusive government around peace and reconciliation, then we're not really tackling the issue fundamentally.
Thank you. Have you anything to add, Clinton, at this point?
Yeah, I would just like to add that when we did the consultations with about 750 or so people, young people, practitioners, and lots of different individuals that were academics and the like that were interested in this area of work or working in it. I mean, the older members, the older people that had done their work on the ground and done research, they were, although they were energised, they were fed up with the iterations that came from the Shared Future, the CSI, T-Book. It goes on, and things haven't changed in areas. And I know there's good news stories, and the work on the ground has been ongoing. But their view was that the foundations had been built on the ground, and we now need to build the house. That this is the kind of, if you like, the final push in the peace process, where we need to dismantle segregation and build a society, as members have said, in relation to what we look like now, as opposed to what we looked like 26 years ago. So, yeah,
I'll come back to you.
I'll save it.
I'd like to go to Northern Youth Forum.
Yeah, if I could just begin and then move on to Ciara, if that's
thank
okay.
you.
So thank you, Chair, Deputy Chair and the committee for inviting us to speak today. We greatly appreciate the opportunity to present on the peace and reconciliation work of the NI Youth Forum. My name is Cohen Taylor. I am the chairperson of the NI Youth Forum, and I am joined by our secretary, Ciara Nahishka. The NI Youth Forum is a regional voluntary youth-led organisation, and we are pleased to be representing our executive committee here today, which is made up of 20 young people aged 11 to 25, as well as thousands of young people from across Northern Ireland who make up our membership. Peace building and good relations is a consistent theme running through all the work we do as an organisation. Last year, we hosted a series of events funded by the Executive Office entitled 25 Years Later, marking the 25th anniversary of the Belfast Good Friday Agreement. This created a space for young people to have their say on peace in Northern Ireland. From these events and our previous peace-building projects, it is clear that young people want to play a role in peace-building. Young people want to see our political representatives working together to advance positive changes that young people want to see. From our research, 47% of young people agreed that politics hasn't changed over the last 20 years. Research we conducted during COVID found that 74% of young people had no faith or confidence in leadership from government. These statistics are a stark indication of the lack of hope and confidence young people have in our institutions. With the NI Executive and the Assembly back functioning, we hope this can begin to change. Our work continues to strive to bring young people together from all backgrounds to find common ground, to socialise together and to learn from one another. This can be seen through our work on the North-South Youth Forum, the Youth Peace Summit, which took place a matter of weeks ago in partnership with the John and Pat Hume Foundation and Youth Action NI, and in the briefing papers which we provided to the committee in advance of today. It includes our Youth Manifesto for Change, a document which combines 6 years of youth-led research and outlines the key issues that young people across NI want to see addressed. Long-term peace was the 4th biggest issue for young people. This reflects the instability young people across Northern Ireland have grown up with. Our members have spent a significant proportion of their lives without devolved government. Over the last number of weeks, we have seen calls for a programme for government, a budget, a multi-year budget for sustainable and cohesive long-term governance. The reports the NI Youth Forum and many other organisations have presented to our MLAs can only be actioned if these crucial first steps are taken. The young people of Northern Ireland call for the realisation of the Belfast Good Friday Agreement. Many of them want to see the agreement taken forward now, and I think that we also need to ensure that we create more spaces like this for a broad range of young people to go on that journey and share their own views as well. And with that, I'll pass over to Ciara.
Yeah, so we're just here because we want to focus on the peace building section of the research, which we hope will support the committee and its future work. In the briefing paper, the 4 key asks which we have for the theme of peace building are outlined, and we also have recommendations for you as a committee to support the advancement of these key asks. Our first ask is introducing a Bill of Rights in Northern Ireland. There should be a Bill of Rights which protects and enshrines the United Nations Convention Rights of the Child in law. We would ask the committee to write directly to the Executive Office, asking them to prioritise the inclusion of a Bill of Rights in the future programme for government. Our second ask is that the Executive Office should conduct a youth-led review of the Together Building a United Community strategy. We are aware of the great work that the youth and community sector do across NI and continue to do so. Under the TBUC strategy, however, young people are currently telling us that TBUC is not fully reflective of our society. Our society is no longer green and orange, but a rainbow of colours, and TBUC should be designed to support all young people to come together regardless of religion, race, sexuality, gender or background. We would ask the committee to write to the department and relevant officials to understand how youth voice has been included in current review of the TBUC strategy. It is our belief, underpinned by Article 12 of the UNCRC, that young people's voice should be heard and acted upon. Our third ask is that the department should invest in safe spaces for dialogue on peace building, legacy and identity, including a plan for sustained and meaningful engagement with young people. Often when young people are consulted, it is merely a ticking box exercise, and young people have continuously expressed consultation fatigue. When they are consulted, they usually don't hear back to understand if their feedback was considered or acted upon at all. We would ask the committee to act as an accountability mechanism to the department to ensure that the voices of young people are heard on topics relating to the peace and reconciliation process, and that their input is valued and considered. Our final ask is to see further investment in voluntary youth services to deliver meaningful, sustainable peace building work at local and regional levels. This work should be long term to allow a genuine relationship building and include learning from international peace building examples. To bring this forward, we would ask the committee to write to the department and relevant offices to understand if the current budget allocation has and or will prioritise investments in voluntary youth services with a meaningful, sustained, peaceful work. Thanks for listening, and we'll be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Ciara. I think I'll just go on to Sylvia and then we'll come back at the end. So thank you, Sylvia. You want to go ahead?
So thank you very much. It's great to have this invitation. Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Committee, for your time this afternoon. A little bit about Coromila. Founded in 1965 by Ray Davies, so it's beyond the Troubles itself, born out of the trauma of the Second World War. And it was a response to the atrocities which we inflicted on each other at that time. A part of a Christian network across Europe, which purpose of building trust and relationships post-conflict. It sounds familiar space to me. In terms of remarks and key issues, I think in terms of civic society, we continue to play an important role in wider peace building and holding an accountability piece alongside others. Language and practice have evolved, and we are beginning to find ways to express our experience of hurt, harm, pain, fragmentation, disconnectedness with ourselves and others. Over this time, we have moved from the language of conflict resolution to transformation. So what needs to be changed in and around the world around us? Recently, I have been working with a colleague around trauma and how trauma is transformed. A quotation that we found was, when a flower doesn't bloom, you fix the environment in which it grows, not the flower itself. So how do we take that, that inspiration and apply that to a review of the tea box strategy? Because it is all encompassing, it is all cross-departmental, and it is all inclusive as well. So I really support the asks of the Northern Ireland Youth Forum. As said before, we are a more diverse society, and we need to move beyond the binary and the binary notions of peace and reconciliation as well. Becoming more inclusive and mindful of the interactions and of the complexity of a broader lived experience in itself. We are translocal, and we're living with the immediacy of other conflicts in the world. And the proximity to that through social media and through television and the utter devastation does impact on us as a society. And it's difficult to comprehend, and it's difficult to process as well. So I think in terms of where we are, we need to find our way and perhaps lead the way in becoming both a local and global human community, characterised by respect, dignity, fairness, cooperation, and with non-violent resolution of conflict at the key of that. So for us at Coromila, we've talked about reconciliation and what it is. We believe that it is a journey, that we are all on with each other and with ourselves, and it's perhaps not even got a destination as such. Reconciliation is a necessary and voluntary aspect of a post-conflict society, and it cannot be imposed. It requires trust, and trust, we must feel that trust. It must be tangible. When we create spaces of mutual respect together, we are more likely to acknowledge the hurt of the past, understand each other better, and shape a vision for a just and interdependent future. So more spaces for that would be an ask. So it brings me to the next generation. And last year, Coromila hosted a service of recommitment to the peace process at Clonard Monastery, and to mark the 25 years of the Belfast Good Friday Agreement. And 3 young people give remarkable contributions, one of which is my granddaughter, so I'm not biased in any way whatsoever. Each spoke of their gratitude for peace, and each of them spoke of their deep frustration, especially at the political level, and the lack of a peace dividend for their generation. Towards the end of the service, each attendee was offered a single candle, and several candles were lit at the edges of the crowd, and each shared their flame, lighting another candle nearby. So rather than a simple passing the torch, implicitly saying to young people, this is your job now, this act sought to highlight our shared responsibility across generations and backgrounds. So it was quite moving for me to be a grandmother there and sharing that experience with my granddaughter. And I'm not going to retire yet, Tim, so don't worry. So how do we support and how do we promote young people becoming involved in peace and reconciliation work? Knowing the stresses and the strains and the issues of that, how do we actually come together and support that? And how do we nurture? And this was a phrase coined many a long time in North Belfast. How do we nurture peace, people, place, and prosperity? It's big questions, and it's big questions we need to lean into. It's also Coromila's belief that standing together on matters which are both painful and contentious shows collective civic courage. It is particularly important for us, and I mean us, to stand with and alongside the most vulnerable in our community. An annual service as part of the Day of Reflection, established by Healing Through Remembering in 2007, is held on the longest day of the year and draws on the healing practice of lament. And that is recommendation number 5 in the Canova report, that day is established, and it is there already. And that this economical service in June 2022, it was reflected that we grieve separately as well. 2 atrocities were referenced. 2022 marked the 30th anniversary of Taban and the 50th anniversary of the Bloody Sunday, alongside many others. So how do we promote collective civic courage and the ritualisation of peace together? How do we lead on that? How do we lead on that whenever we are holding, for many of us, the trauma of the past in our bodies, in our hearts and our minds? And there is a social and biological transmission described as transgenerational trauma, which is passed on to our children and grandchildren in some instances. At a recent event hosted by Coromila, Dr. James Gordon of the Centre of Mind-Body Medicine, his remark was, if you don't work with trauma, it persists, like a ball and a chain which keeps you tied to the past and confined by the past. And he advocated an approach whereby we use techniques and active movement to free us from being shut down, to help us embrace the present, to help us develop a perspective which is more sensitive and aware, and to connect ourselves, to connect with ourselves and with each other. And whenever we think about transforming trauma, and that leads us to legacy, and we know the impact of the recent legacy bill, the unresolved pain and the trauma of victims and survivors. Today in Northern Ireland, there is still the presence of paramilitaries, ongoing punishment beatings, and outbursts of dissident Republican activity. How do we transform this? What can we change? How do we lean into this conversation? Coromila is an interesting organisation. We sit in the intersection of church faith communities and the community relations sector. While Coromila believes that love, grace and forgiveness are necessary for reconciliation, we do not believe that love, grace and forgiveness is the monopoly of one faith, tradition or indeed culture. It's for all of us, regardless of who we are. We maintain that our different faiths, traditions and cultures should not divide us from each other, but help us rehumanize each other.
I'm going to stop you there. I'm just conscious of sort of giving everybody about 3 or 4 minutes as an opening, but we'll open up and maybe you'll be able to expand on some of the points you hadn't got to. So thank you so much to you all so far. I want to come back to a point you raised, Tim, but I think everybody sort of touched on it, and that was the degree to which you still feel that there is paramilitary control in some of the communities that, you know, were most impacted by the Troubles. And
I suppose you touched on it earlier on, your colleagues did,
yeah.
Chair, in terms of Bushmills at the weekend, but
yeah.
you know, there's a relative piece, but obviously we know from the facts and figures that there's still occurrences, as Sylvia said, of dissident activity and obviously coercive control by some others. They may not all be as linked to paramilitaries in the past, but that when there's paramilitaries or criminality, it still exists, and you have to ensure that it's tackled. And obviously there's different mechanisms out there, but it's something that obviously came up very strongly in terms of the conversations with people on the ground, because they're facing that day in, day out.
And I suppose that was going to be a follow-up point around, you know, is there any fresh thinking about how we get these guys just to go away and, you know, and give up the grip that they still have in so many communities? Is there anything new that after 25 years that hasn't been thought of that the communities are asking for?
Well, just personally, one of the things I find frustrating in the last 12 months, the budget in London, prior to the executive come up in London, both times, there was extra £3 million to tackle paramilitarism. Extra £3 million. there wasn't an extra £3 million to support peace and reconciliation. So there's sometimes an imbalance in terms of the investment in peace and reconciliation. And I think everybody said at some point, when will it stop? But you need to ensure, whether it's through community development, peace and reconciliation work, that there is people there who are there 24/7 on the ground. Some of them are political reps, some are community operatives, some are peacemakers, but they don't always get the recognition. And given the pressures on budgets, as the executive officer just told us, that pressure isn't always the same in terms of supporting Parliament moving away from criminality.
Thank you. Just here, Ciara or Cohen, I'm always interested in that word, that phrase around peace dividend, and I just wonder, for people of your age group, like, what do you think that the programme for government could start focusing on and delivering that would actually encourage people of your age group to stay here for university and not go away, and feel that there's something here to stay for?
No, thank you. That's a really good question. And I suppose in the report that we included in your briefing pack, one of the key recommendations at the very back was around MLAs returning to a power sharing government at that time, but also that would operate and function effectively to promote equality and diversity. And I think in terms of a programme for government, it's about how do you actually then action that. And just in terms of the education element, whenever we were doing our research, one thing that stood out to me was the fact that the group of young people, that was a cross-section of young people from across Northern Ireland, none of them had attended an integrated school. And there was an expression of a desire to do so from those participants, and some of them. And I think it then goes back to the Good Friday Agreement, and sometimes people are talking about new solutions, but there was a lot of very good stuff written in the agreement in terms of integrated education, shared housing, a Bill of Rights. And I suppose whenever we are talking about a programme for government and looking forward, maybe looking back to those core ideas that were already written there 26 years ago would be valuable from my perspective.
Ciara, have you anything to add? No. Okay, thank you. I've just a quick one for you, Sylvia, and it's really in relation to, there was obviously the Peace and Reconciliation Fund from the European Union were so valuable in the early days after the Good Friday Agreement, and I just wonder if you could comment on the degree to which you have felt the impact through your organisation of how those funds have depleted over the years.
There's, I suppose what I will speak into first is just the sheer resilience of the voluntary and community sector as they deal with that. Peace funding isn't the easiest of funding. It's one of those funding mechanisms that keeps us in the binary. It doesn't allow us to be as innovative and creative as we would like, and it's really restrictive as well. Also, the way that it has changed over the years, it means it's only really big organisations that can access that funding, and that's quite difficult. It's very difficult for small organisations unless they're in a collaboration and partnership. I'm sure the impact of the various peace programmes have I personally know of some work that they have done in terms of transforming space, looking at interfaces, which has been really pioneering. But also, what's been perhaps we need to explore with all of that. Did that keep us in our separate silos? Did that support collaboration and partnership? So there's a little bit of a question mark about that. What has been the unintended consequences of investment to Northern Ireland? I think as well, in terms of the cross-border projects, I was involved in one or two cross-border projects. They were really meaningful projects. That dialogue north and south has been really helpful, and many relationships and connections have come off the back of those initial projects.
And they're enduring, is that what you mean? Yeah.
Yes, absolutely.
Thank you. Deputy Chair, Connie?
Thank you everybody for coming along today and giving us evidence, and I think listening to young people's voices, something I'm really, really interested in. I think they really need to have their voices amplified in this society and in politics and in this place in Stormont. And I think looking at the papers we have, they are leaps and bounds ahead of our government departments when it comes to their ideas for peace building, for creating positive change in our society. So I think I'd ask for all the panellists really is I'm really interested to know, first of all, the kind of input you have when it comes to executive strategies around peace and reconciliation, such as the communities in transition and tackling paramilitarism and the T-Buck strategy that we heard about earlier. You know, this is something that you live and breathe with your work, and I'm just really interested to know what input you have and the directions you'd really like to see a new T-Buck strategy going towards. So whoever wants to take it, we can.
I worked for the Community Relations Council for 16 years as policy director, so I've had input to nearly every strategy that's come up. And since I've taken retirement 7 years ago, but it's given me the opportunity to be able to be freer in my opinions, and there's always the consultation around these policies, and the same thing said all the time. At every consultation, I can guarantee you the same issues are raised, and the research that's done, the same recommendations come up, but they're rarely followed through. And I have to say, the one thing that's missing, and I hope in the new revised T-Buck, I hope it's not called T-Buck for starters, because people on the ground that aren't engaged in this line of work haven't a notion of what it's about. It needs to be something that says what it is, a peace plan or whatever. But the thing that's missing when we talk about political leadership is the intolerance of intolerance, if you like. The clear strategy around, for example, interfaces. In T-Buck the last time it was get them down by 2023, which was great. But it didn't say that across the board you need that, and we've talked about that. You need the collective approach, a holistic approach, to look at what's the deterrent, what are people afraid of, who's stopping the interfaces coming down, what's the reality, what are the security reports on them, because there's very little activity nowadays at them. They're sporadic. It's mostly internal, and it's oppression by paramilitaries and putting up negative symbols that keep people out. It's young people having to live behind barriers, and that becomes a human rights issue. They're at the mercy of paramilitaries. They're kept in single identity areas, and everything around them tells them what they are and who they should be, and keeps others out. There's an equality issue around people in working class areas and single identity areas being in poverty, not just 26 years, the past 50 plus years, the same areas and their single identity are suffering the same issues. And who's tackling that? So we need to, the government needs to be saying we will have shared housing, not just new built, but we will have all areas open to all people, and everyone's welcome and everyone's safe, and create the conditions to allow people to do that. But it needs to be a very direct, across the board, across the parties, across the departments, saying this is our vision for housing, for education, for our young people, for those minority groups that didn't have a say 26 years ago, 50 years ago, because we were focused on other issues. We're building a new society, but the legacy is holding us back in some respects, so we need to address both as a parallel process. There needs to be something that says this is the final phase that we have, and we need to do things differently. We've done the work to date. It's been good work, some of it not so good, some of it needs to be improved, but we need to build on and do things differently. For example, we need to have, if you like, a corporation or company to say to interface areas, here's X amount of money. If you stay as you are, you're going to get poorer, but we're prepared to invest in you and address your issues. But a collective approach to all those issues we've raised around education and health and poverty, and building the trust and reconciliation if there's a fear there. But there needs to be a determination from government to say we're determined to get out of this. We're not looking at what holds us back, we're looking at how do we move forward, which quite honestly hasn't been the case, I find, in the recent strategies.
Yeah, I think just following on from that, do you think my own perception is when we see things that are those physical structures that represent remnants of the past, of things should be in the past, like paramilitaries, but are still around today. Something I hear in my own constituency, which has two areas that are CIT, communities in transition, is that if government can't take down a flag, a paramilitary symbol, a mural or a wall, how on earth are people to have confidence that when they phone the police that they'll be dealt with effectively when it comes to organised crime or intimidation in their communities? And as you said, I think that's a really good word, is determination. The determination that all departments need to have to take this forward, because I think people on the ground who are actually affected by this, they don't feel that at all. So if any others want to come in, apologies. I'm conscious there's just Dimpna and I there, so if anybody else wants to come in on that and things that you would like to see, I'd be really interested too.
I think I would like to see acknowledgement of the journey so far and the good work that we have achieved as a society and across many of the sectors. I was particularly struck by yourself, Emma, coming from a rural background. I come from a rural background as well, and we had to negotiate an awful lot in those days. We had to negotiate how we travelled the roads, the lanes, all of that, because it was a mixed community. And things were held to a certain extent. And parts of the business sector, parts of the voluntary and community sector, the education sector, are really are doing the work, but it's not being recognised. And some of it is very pioneering work. So I suppose for this review of TBUC, and I agree with Dimpna, it's an awful name. I'd love to see the name itself changed to something else. And I've lost my train of thought, sorry about that. But it's affirming the work. It's been very clear about what needs done as well, and how we work together to allow solutions to emerge to that. Sometimes solutions are not necessarily in your face. I think it takes that relationship building, that sense of getting to know the issue, knowing people's lived experience to begin to understand, because people who have the lived experience will also have the solution in itself.
You want to respond?
Yeah,
Go ahead,
just if I can come in on that. I actually was thinking about a point that Sinead made earlier, around the fact that it isn't just peace building that's an issue for people in our communities. There's if you do a TBUC programme and leave it and then have issues with health or issues with education or can't access other services, that has an impact in itself. And our pinball project, which we did a few years ago, was about young people from a disadvantaged socioeconomic background being able to create a video which highlighted from their own experience how they're being pushed to pillar from post through our services in Northern Ireland. And I suppose whenever then we're looking at something like a TBUC review, I think it's important that whenever we're reviewing these things that we're including the voices of all or as many young people as can contribute as possible, and those service users who've maybe used the past programmes. I think that that's incredibly important. And yes, we've made one of our asks about youth engagement, but whenever you're doing that, it needs to be meaningful, and that engagement then needs to shape future services, because it is those young people who need that wraparound approach, and as other people have said, a cross-departmental one.
Thank you. I'm going to move on, just with a few more to come in. Emma, please.
Thanks very much, Chair, and thanks very much to you all. I noticed in your presentation, the first ask, and Ciara, you referenced it verbally there as well, was around the Bill of Rights. Mm-hmm. And anybody who's been on this committee for any length of time will know that this is a bit of a hobby horse of mine. Mm-hmm. Myself and the Chair, Paula, and Carol, who's not here today, sat on the ad hoc committee during the last mandate, and were particularly frustrated by that process. So, I mean, I would agree with you around the importance of that, and Cohen, you referred to the fact that obviously it's a 1998 objective or promise, commitment. And I always think that an awful lot of the problems that we face within society here could be resolved if we were governing on a rights-based approach. If we were ensuring that everyone was able to access their rights, then no one would be left behind. So I wonder, you obviously have a recommendation for ourselves that we can consider as a committee, and I would obviously support it wholeheartedly. Have you engaged with anybody else around that particularly?
I suppose it's something that we will bring into all of the work that we do, because I would say a few of you will probably have seen this document before, and it's our youth manifesto, and it's something that we have compiled through a broad range of our research as an organisation, and we bring to meetings with MLAs and civil servants regularly. And whenever we're doing that, one of the 4 key asks at the front of it is around a Bill of Rights. It's also around an APG for youth participation, which we were successful in getting, and also around knowledge of rights, so those rights are meaningful, and also a minister responsible specifically for young people. So in answer to your question, I think that it's something that we've brought up quite a lot with decision makers, and it's also something that I would agree in terms of that rights-based approach, but also to look to Scotland, who have got it embedded and enshrined. And I think whenever we're then looking, sort of to go back to Paul's question about a programme for government, embedding a human rights-based approach within that programme for government, I think would be incredibly beneficial as well for young people.
Yeah, I say that, I suppose, because one of the frustrations that I have is that it's a duty of the British government, and they have relied on this, that there's no cross-community consensus for rights, which is factually inaccurate, because the research that we did showed us that across the board the population were in favour of a Bill of Rights regardless of religious or political background. But that's what they're relying on as an excuse. So I don't know if you're doing any engagements with the British government, the NIO, any of that. And obviously the pair of you have been brilliant advocates for your cause today and have spoke really articulately, and I think that it would be really good if you could raise that, and I would endorse you doing that.
I suppose what we'd really hope from this setting is that you would be able to. In the sense of we engage regularly with the Irish government, with the British government, with our devolved institutions. I was on behalf of the Youth Forum speaking to the Scottish government as well recently, and what we'd really find is that a committee like this does have the power to bring people in front of them, and I saw that just a few moments ago whenever you had TEO here. And I think that I understand that there's frustrations both inside politics and from the community and voluntary sector, but I think we all need to work together collaboratively on doing that, and it's really helpful to have the support from as many MLAs from all parties as possible to do so, and try and actually have that dialogue to build some consensus around the kind of Bill of Rights that we can get broad political and community support on.
Just before you go on, and I'm not sure whether the clerk's going to cringe whenever I say this, but I think we're going to invite the Northern Ireland office here and ask them about that issue, because they got a very comprehensive report on the Bill of Rights. So there you go, Michael.
Right, Cohen and Ciara back.
Are you finished?
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, Sinead, please.
Thank you to everybody. I'm going to be controversial now, but can an inclusive peace plan be achieved without the reforms of this institution? Mm-hmm. Because from the document that you have given to us, we see very clearly that there's an unequal economic and social peace dividend. But we also hear really loudly about the marginalised voice, the voice of the other. And the other, it's not always just the Alliance Party, but it's women, it's young people, it's older people. They don't hear themselves in these institutions. We're 26 years on, and it doesn't reflect the society or the people or the progressiveness that has happened in those 26 years in between. The people are ahead of us, and yet we are embedded into the institutions that are not reflecting. And how can you have an inclusive peace plan and reconciliation building if we're embedded to the past, which is not reflective of the future? So, I mean, the reform of these institutions could do tremendous things in building real peace. This government has never invested in integrated education. Not one school has never really truly built one integrated school. We're not invested in that way. Economics is secondary to, as it says in your report, to divide and conquer. Always. And so how can we transform anything if we won't? We invest in paramilitarism instead of investing in peace building. We've got the cart before the horse, and 26 years later we've learned nothing, and we're still looking at TBUC has not delivered for our communities. It has not been transformational. And people are being left behind and being failed, really, to be honest. So, I mean, that's a statement, but it's also just, I want your reflection on inclusive peace building without reform of the institutions.
Like, if you go back to the original document we launched last May around call to action around the Peace Summit, you know, item 4 was adapt the agreement. So the Bill of Rights addressing some of the dysfunctionality of the executive and the institutions was number 4 in the call to action. So it was very strong within the Peace Summit. Obviously, that was in the absence of an executive and the institutions up and running. So I think people welcome the fact that the institutions are up and running, but they recognise the dysfunctionality that's still there. I suppose you have to play where the ball is, Sinead. That's the challenge. I suppose the reality is, unless, sometimes I feel sorry for the executive office, not all the time, but it might help if there was a permanent secretary. That might help in terms of leadership as well. But, they just get left holding the ball. Other departments get away with things that so the whole government approach is planning. It's regeneration. It is invest in AI. Taking the responsibility seriously around good relations. There's things. The question is not about just collaboration. It's actually, I think we were talking earlier on to Claire, and one of the things in the previous ill-fated programme, outcome-based accountability. The Mark McGuinness and Arlene Foster was front and centre of that. I was ill-fated, didn't get through. It didn't get to be adopted, but that was a good policy. But it has to be outcome-based. And if every single department has a responsibility, not just to collaborate, not just to be proofing, but to actually make sure they implement good relations and peace and reconciliation as a foundation stone of their work. They may not have the money, but they can tie things together. And what I mentioned earlier on, Sinead, the lack of investment now in the Northwest. It's the exact same in North and West Belfast. They argue that that even though it's only 5 minutes into the city centre, oh no, we can't invest in there. People want to be in the city centre, and that's just an excuse. But if you could transform, and there's ideas like development zones in the UK, the peace lines, and other parts of divided parts of the north, with economic development, that would go a long way to transform those communities and create a much more hopeful and reconciled community. So, within the limited, there's clearly an appetite for change that came out of the Peace Summit, but equally there's a need to have a much more collaborative government. But it's based around outcomes. It's not just saying, well, we want you to collaborate. It has to have much more force than that.
Do you want to add to that?
Yeah, I think last year, the 25-year celebrations, whatever way we want to call them, we had the great and the good here, and there was people who invested politically, gave us support financially, gave us billions. And I think quite often we need to call those people back in and be honest with them and say, look, we still need a bit of help here. And for them, not just to give us a bit of help, and not financially necessarily, but morally, to make sure their investment is seen through to the end. But I think they can also bring pressure to bear. And we need to be honest about needing help and what are the outstanding issues and our commitment to addressing those and move the society forward into the international best practice of peace building that we're regarded as. And I also think that reforming the institutions is not in our gift, unfortunately, in terms of the peace building end. But if if we can write in peace and reconciliation to the programme for government, at least with something to monitor, to challenge, to support, to advise on and be part of. So I think those two things, and likewise with TBUC, and the evaluation and monitoring of that is critical in terms of people saying how well we're doing or not, and what we need to do next, and what support can be offered. And also the challenge, if the institutions aren't reformed, there needs to be a challenge to government when they're lacking.
Okay. Thank you. I'm going to move on, Claire.
Thank you, Chair. Talk all day about this, but I know we don't have time. Just a quick point around paramilitarism. I don't really like calling them that. I like calling them criminals, because I think paramilitarism lends itself to the manipulation that they have of those communities. And I think even the question that the Chair asked around what are those communities asking, I'm not sure they know, because I think they're being coercively controlled by these individuals whose only aim isn't to protect them, in terms of any cause. The only cause they seem to have is lining their own pockets. So I think we need to be honest about that if we're truly going to tackle that. It's also to pick up on the points, and Cohen, you actually outlined it perfectly. We have this outcomes-based accountability approach that we led on in 2016. I'm not sure if the current government is going to do that, but the structures aren't conducive to it. Because if we are going to have outcomes for children and young people, we need to have a department for children and young people. So if we're looking at changing the structures and doing that truly, then I think it's these types of conversations that we need to have. I met with some people earlier on today, and I'm going to direct this to you, Ciara, because I think these are both incredible. If we have votes for 16, you would be sitting here rather than some of us, because you have articulated these issues really important. But they give me a really interesting answer. I'm 37 years old, so I was 11 when the Good Friday Agreement was signed. I do have a recollection of the conflict prior to that. I'm really pleased to say that either of you probably don't have a recollection of that conflict. So what do you understand peace to be, knowing that you've lived in a time when, peace to me is the absence of violence, but what's peace to you as young people, and do you see Northern Ireland as peaceful? And
I would say that there's always two sides to it, because there's some people who would be like, no, it's far better, and you have parents saying, well, at least you're not getting bombed and things like that, but people aren't going into certain communities because they feel threatened. They know that they're not welcome. If you go into a street with flags, depending on what side of the community you're from, you're not welcome. You know that from the get-go. But I would just say the version of peace for young people is just yeah. I don't know what it.
What the young person said to me is that they don't see it peace because they don't feel safe. So for me, recognising, peace is the absence of conflict on a much wider scale. For young people, it was really worrying for me to hear that they didn't feel safe and therefore they don't see peace. So
I would personally disagree with that. I wouldn't say that is correct, because the way I like to look at it is, if you go into a hospital and there's someone standing there in a full body cast, but there's someone there with a broken arm, doesn't mean their arm hurts any less just because they're in a full body cast.
Okay.
It doesn't mean, yes, there's change, but there's still a long, long way to go. Mm-hmm. And that is how young people feel. Young people don't believe that the politics have changed. Yes, maybe it's more peaceful, but then what about people that are still being affected by paramilitaries? Mm-hmm. And just by going out and being themselves, but then also you can't go into certain areas, do you know what I mean? So I wouldn't really agree with the statement, and I wouldn't say most young people would agree with this statement.
Okay. Yeah. Another quick one.
Go ahead.
Yeah. It's in relation to trauma. I talk about this a lot within this committee, and I think as a committee we're going to look at that work moving forward. How do you see us addressing trauma in a way that, I think realistically trauma is a fact of life, and particularly in a post-conflict society, whether it's direct or indirect. I 100% agree that it's transgenerational. I think we even read studies that it's in people's DNA now. So it's in the womb, and if we don't address it, then it is going to permeate regardless of how we change the environment. So how do we address trauma? Almost to build resilience in people, so that if they are affected by trauma, that they can lead their lives in a way that it doesn't impact or hinder their lives, if you like.
How we have looked at trauma is looking at an approach which doesn't medicalise it as a problem. It's about accepting that trauma will impact on everybody's life at some stage and can come in different ways and be felt differently too. The work that we do is very much grounded in working alongside people, looking at how we become more self-aware and what triggers us in terms of trauma, how that feels within the body. So it's the whole embodied experience of trauma, and how do we attend to ourselves in order to be in a position to look after and care for others. So it's I suppose it's a gentle way, but it's a way that is where evidence has been produced that says it really does make an impact. So in Stormont, we did very simple, not simple, but exercises that involved movement, that involved shaking, that involved dance, that involved laughing, that involved deep breathing as well. And there's, so that's one way of looking at trauma, and we're very keen to look at how we can do that and, transform trauma at a community level alongside communities in a way that's felt safe and non-threatening. So for us, it's going down that gentle route of knowing more about ourselves in the first instance, and how trauma is impact on us and how we react to it, how we manage it, but also being mindful about creating safe spaces that are trauma informed, so people can start to have connections and start to think from another aspect of their brain.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Harry, please.
Okay, thank you very much, Chair. I'll just concentrate on Sylvia, that's okay. Or Amelia. I had the pleasure of visiting your site once, so I was very impressed with it. I'm just wondering how genuinely are things going at the minute, and how have things changed, would you say, in this past 5, maybe 10 years? And what's your vision going forward, or your worries?
Oh, please. My goodness, that's a big question, Harry. Last week I had some funders over, and they're called the Blue Pilgrims, and I took them. We met in Fitzroy Presbyterian Church, and it was Cormila is an organisation made up of members as well. So I had 2 members who were there at the very beginning of the Troubles. Not at the beginning of the organisation, that was 1965, but through the Troubles, through the conflict. And they were talking about very dynamic work, about minibuses, about going into housing estates where there was snipers, where there was bullets flying. There was the aftermath and during violence as well. And I was really struck by their experience and about the work that they had done with Coromila. And then alongside me, on the other side, was Denise and Heba. And Heba came from the Sudan, and she has just got her British citizenship, her and her entire family, and they're very pleased, very happy about that. And there was a richness, a difference in the conversation, which began to explore trauma, which began to explore the diversity of communities as we are, about the impact and the value of new communities coming into Northern Ireland, and about how we welcome and host those, and how actually we talk to them and make that connection with them about what our past has been, so that they can start to relate to it. So our work is becoming more diverse. We still do the traditional schools work, youth work, legacy work, theology work as well, alongside and acknowledging that we are more diverse, and that as if we are responding to emerging needs, we have to be aware of what's happening in and around us. It's a very dynamic place to be. The place itself is just a wonderful site. I'm glad you experienced that.
Yeah. And I suppose we follow on, Chair. Yes, I know exactly where you are, but do you fan out to the whole area, or would you be mostly concentrated of where you are? You know, would you cater for the most of Northern Ireland, or?
So we're located in Ballycastle,
I know, yeah,
in North Antrim,
yeah.
and
Do you know what I mean? It's just
yes, so we do
imagine.
our programs. So we have got a program at centre, but then I work alongside 4 fantastic program managers who go out into local communities on a regional basis to deliver programs of work. So we are a regional organisation, but our site is in Ballycastle. The Peace and Reconciliation Centre is in Ballycastle.
Yes, I was going to ask how you make yourselves known, but you have 4, so that's.
We've got a lovely membership of over up to about 100 people, 190 people. Goodness me, and they're members of the Coromila community, and they vote in our governance. So they have a real feel and a real ownership of the space, and what we practice in terms of peace and reconciliation, they also practice in their local communities. So we look at impact in that way as well. In that we're just not local; we're across the piece, we're north-south, and we're beyond Northern Ireland as well. We also look at international practice to inform our work too.
And through the chair, do you still keep contact? I mean, with Europe, you're obviously formed 1965, and from a network in Europe, but do you still have contact?
We still have contacts with centres in France and Italy, and they were hit during COVID time, but we're coming back now to more face-to-face meetings, thankfully.
Thank you.
Thank you.
That's just one question.
Yeah, no, appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Brian, please.
Okay, well, this is an interesting conversation we're having, and I've made some notes. I spent a bit longer at Coromila. I was there for a year as a volunteer in the 1980s, so I really enjoyed that year, and it was a great experience for me then. Also a difficult time, for Northern Ireland. Significant negative events happened around that time, and just also, with Tim, we were group leaders for different parties on the council for quite a few years. So my overall view, I would say, is great progress has been made in Northern Ireland. I think we have to say that. That's not to say we, of course, have to still working at this issue. We will always have good relations issues to work on, partly because we just have political division. We have political division on the most fundamental issue of which country we're part of, and division on many issues relating to that. So to me, first of all, it's important that that there is respect for difference, and there's a commitment to that differences should be worked out in peaceful and democratic means, and that there's an intolerance and rejection of violence as a means to bring about change or to bring about keeping things the same. So I think that is a fundamental of democracy, and our country has learned that, unfortunately, when you go down the path of violence, there's no end to where that leads to, and many people experience that in their lives, and you just go into a deeper and darker pit, And there was times when we thought we were going to go over the edge, and whilst we were very close to it, it could have been even worse, in many of our lifetimes. So when people talk about what is the problem, some people say sectarianism is the problem. I would always say that intolerance is the problem. That there must be tolerance and respect for difference. We shouldn't reject that people have the right for free association. That people have, but there must be respect for other people who are different. So different faith, different politics, different cultural views. But there's a great lot of very positive work going on in schools through shared education. So it's not only the integrated sector, which is the only model that works. There's a lot of positive works. It's not to say that everything should become the same. You have to have respect for people's identity, and they shouldn't feel they have to somehow give up their identity or have it demeaned. But there must be tolerance of others who are different, and respect for that difference. In terms of a Bill of Rights, that's something there won't be political agreement on at this stage. That's still something being worked on. So that is a work in progress. There's agreement at higher levels, but
there's no progress. Guys, let me speak.
So, but that's probably completed what I wanted to say. I respect the work that your groups are involved in, and whilst we've made great progress, it is something that we're going to have as a society. It will always be something that is there, but as politicians, that's what I feel I represent. That I can have differences with people. I was on the different side of debate, many debates with Tim. I was also on the same side of many debates with him in our years in Belfast City Council. And I would say we agreed on many more things than we disagreed. So if we can focus on the things that we can agree, we can achieve more, I suppose.
Go ahead, Colin, and then I'll bring Tim in.
So I just wanted to say thank you for that, and I think bringing up shared education is incredibly important. We represent over 7,000 young people, and a lot of those young people, including myself, have been in shared education programmes. And what I would say is that just like TBUC's being reviewed, I think that we should review all of the different mechanisms that we're using to try and bring people together, and possibly reviewing and trying to strengthen that would also be helpful as well. But in terms of just quickly a point that was made about giving up identity. So on a personal level, I went to an integrated school, to actually Prairie College and Lagan College, and I feel that young people who are able to attend an integrated school are encouraged to celebrate and talk about their own identities and to learn from each other rather than give up any identity. And also just in terms of the right to an education and the right to have your voice heard, I do think it's important that we maybe reflect on the fact that young people who were part of our research did in large numbers express a desire for more integrated or shared or inclusive education, in whichever form that can take, dependent on the community. And I would really welcome engagement with you and with your colleagues to discuss that further. I know that we are very lucky to have engagement from your party in the APG for youth participation, and would really like to strengthen that.
Yeah. Just to clarify through the chair, I don't want to be misrepresented. I'm not suggesting young people who go to integrated schools are in any way giving up their identity, far from it. But the point I was making that there's more than one model in education which is making a positive contribution to good relations. It's not just the integrated sector, and I have great respect for the integrated sector and the work they're doing. But many, I would say virtually all schools are also involved in promoting good relations.
And obviously just respond, obviously Brian and I go back some time, but I suppose this is a journey that we're all on. We're different generations here. Some bore the brunt of the troubles and bore the brunt of sectarian interfaces, and obviously you've got the hope and vision of the young organisations. But all organisations are committed to peaceful and democratic means to achieve political change. And I almost thought some of the comments were like John Hume, respect for difference and diversity is so important. But it is a journey. And the John Hume Foundation and Glen Creed just launched recently a respectful politics pledge, because the amount of hate in communities on these islands against political representatives, intolerance against immigrants, against refugees, is a growing problem that we need to tackle. We've seen in the south recently the Guards tackled, political representatives being tackled in a way that I thought we'd seen the end of at the end of the Troubles in the north, because we all had to face the brunt as political representatives of threats and intimidation from all sides, and now we've got this new threat to democracy. And so I think it's all in our interest to continue the journey of peace. We don't always agree. I think in terms of, even in Belfast City Council, Brian, you may agree, when we brought the group leaders together to have private conversations from all parties, then we managed to deal with the issues in a maybe a more mature and sensible way rather than on the floor of the council. I think those mature conversations need to happen everywhere. But the reality is, from the people that have been involved, the evidence of young people, the evidence of people involved in peace and regulation, there's still a journey to go of unfinished business. And we have to be honest about that, and we have to try to work together to tackle those outstanding issues. And together, I think we can.
That was a good note to end on there, Tim. So thank you so much to all of you. I really appreciate your time this afternoon. Certainly a lot of food for thought, but also some actions for us to take away and lobby on, and campaign with the First Deputy First Minister on. So thank you so much again for your time today. Okay, members, just going back to the agenda then. So we have our draft forward work programme on page 67 of the meeting pack. Just want to draw to your attention that we still haven't heard from the junior ministers. Usually they will have come before committee by now, so I was just going to ask for permission to reissue that invite to them to come along. Okay, agreement. And then we also then are due a second presence of the First Minister and Deputy First Minister before summer recess, so we'll issue that invite as well. In terms of getting the institutions and religious orders in front of committee in terms of the contributions to the redress scheme, the director of one of the organisations is on sabbatical until September, so and others haven't come back to us yet, so we were wondering if we should just put that session back until after the summer, but I think that I think that's it. we will go ahead with the session, and we'll call them out publicly, those who don't. Okay, so any other comments on the board work programme? Just to say, we are going to, from June, we are going to look at reversing, having the stakeholders first and then the TO officials. Go ahead.
Can I ask, have we got anything planned around the Identity and Language Act? Briefing, perhaps that would be something that the junior ministers would be well enabled to answer. And just that there was a ministerial question put there this week in relation to the Identity and Language Act, and Minister Riley said that this required ministerial decisions in order to establish the relevant bodies. Can we write to the TO and ask them, when they will, what is the timeline for those ministerial decisions? We have a shortened mandate here. We've all been elected 2 years ago, I believe, that today or yesterday or whatever.
That's right.
I know, and but we have a shortened mandate, and I'd really like to establish some of these answers when we will have these appointments made.
I think we talked about that for a June meeting.
Yes, it's a date to be scheduled, but June has been requested.
Yes, but no, I think we're all.
Can we write and ask them just when those ministerial decisions are going to be made in order to make the appointments?
Yes,
I could just come in there as well. I totally agree with what Sinead said, and I think there is a concern that the ministerial decision is made, then you go through a recruitment process, which we understand takes many months after that, and I think many in the community who are eager to see this are feeling very frustrated, understandably. So yeah, I agree. I'd be happy for us to write a letter.
Okay, agree.
Went up and it went down again, so I'm not sure if you still.
Roderick, did you want to come in?
No, it's fine. It's been covered. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Sorry. Okay, members, just moving on then. I know that the clerk is going to be meeting with the official from the department then to get those June meetings all scheduled out. So hopefully we'll, in the next week's table papers, committee pack, will have the details for those dates scheduled in. Okay, so in terms of correspondence then, so that's found at page 73 of your pack and page 30 of your table pack, and I would refer you to page 38 of the table pack, and there's a letter from an individual requesting the briefing paper supplied by Cosica at the committee meeting on the 10th of April, and I'm just wondering, are you content to share that? Yeah, I don't think, okay. And are there any other matters that people want to raise in relation to correspondence this week? No. I suppose I was a little bit interested in the information around the common framework response we got from the department, and so I'll be following that up. So I'll once we get some feedback on that, I'll give more of an update on it. Okay, so members, just a reminder that the meeting with the Oireachtas Joint Committee on the implementation of the Good Friday Agreement, which was scheduled for tomorrow, has been postponed, and we are going to try and get a new date for that. So members, date, time and place for next meeting is next Wednesday in this room at 2 o'clock.
Just any other business.
Yes,
again, I think we have to be really robust with the department. I know that there's not a permanent secretary of TEO, but they're treating this committee with complete disrespect. I know you've said it 2 or 3 times as well, but I think it has to go out from the whole committee. We need papers. You know, we're not here to kind of talk about things. We're here to actually scrutinise and be, you know, deliver transparency. And we can't do it if we have no documents in front of us. And, you know, the Executive Office is not a place where everything goes to die. We actually have to see transformative change. This is where it happens.
I think even just the notes that they spoke to, I thought even if we could have just had those, so that we just even had some headlines, I think that was...
There just must be an inability to sign off on documents, because it was told last week they couldn't get ministerial sign off. And you know, it's a common theme. It's destructive.
Can you raise that?
We include that in the letter to FM and DFM.
Yes, we'll include that in the letter. Okay, thank you. Okay, members, thank you very much. Thank you.
Committee Room 30, Sound.